Hello, DH here and welcome back to Europe in Detail. In this episode we're going to discuss a very controversial bridge within Venice. It's talked about for more than one reason, but the main reason is it's really ugly. It doesn't suit any of the architecture in the city at all, and we're going to dive into this in today's episode, among a few other things. We're also going to expand the city limits out, and this episode would probably contain the most detailing I've done so far. To be able to talk about that bridge in any fashion requires me building it, and in order to build it I need to create a shoreline on either side of the Grand Canal here to be able to build it realistically. There's also some really vital pedestrian pathways and access points from this area that I want to get in nice and early. Obviously we're going to have foot traffic going over said bridge as well, and I make sure to get all of those keys and all the pedestrian pathways in place before I place any buildings down. As hard as I've worked to try and get this map as accurate as possible, I am still left with the odd area that is a little larger than it is in the real life version, and this is one of those areas. So some of these buildings are a little bit more elongated than they might be in that real life model, and to be honest I'm okay with this because I knew there was going to be some sacrifices to be made in order to get this as accurate as possible. There was no way I was ever going to just ace all of it. It's just far too complicated. And when I say the buildings are a little bit more elongated or there's a little bit more space, I am literally talking just a few meters. It's not like an extra kilometer or anything silly like that. So here you can see me working with the pedestrian paths, and they get pretty intricate here. There's also this really tricky little change in ground level here that I wanted to make sure I get right, and this is going to be the first area in this episode that we detail pretty heavily. This is going to be in view a lot of the time, and like I've been saying, most of the edge of the Grand Canal is going to be the same. Very heavily detailed and usable. I want pedestrians going through intricate little wee alleyways using all the restaurant fronts, and it is those citizens that are really going to breathe life into the city. So speaking of little wee intricate walkways and stuff, this little wee ramp here to the side of these stairs is a perfect example. This little walkway is here in real life, but in my version of Venice I'm going to force a lot of our citizens down this little wee pathway because I just think it's really cool seeing them walk through these little wee narrow walkways. So once I was happy with the placement of those pedestrian paths, it was time to put all the retaining walls down and all the surface networks that are required. One thing that City Skylines 1 has always struggled with is subtle changes in terrain elevation, and that's why I need to use these surface networks. The terrain here is a little unlevel as well, so I put some more stairs in where I need to. So hang in there guys, we're getting closer and closer to the bridge, but I need to get all of this right. You can see there's already a lot of citizens using our bridge. That's because the main bus terminal is directly across the road here. We also have a lot of citizens that are coming directly off the monorail or just coming and parking their vehicle here and walking into Venice. So in real life there's one building out the front here, and that's the one we're working on now. We're going to put a few shops in here and detail them with awnings and such. But this building is also a good example of what I mentioned earlier. This is a little bit bigger than the real life model because I just had more room here than I probably should have. Again, it's only by a few meters, but it's worth pointing out. I also make one of these shops here into an information booth or information stand, and there's a little kiosk I add in as well. This seemed appropriate as it was sort of the gateway to the city. Now I'd like to try something cool and a little bit different. It looks like in real life there's a restaurant on top of this building here, so I'm going to try and do this within game but make it functional and get real citizens up here. So how would I go about doing that? Well, I'm going to run pedestrian paths up to the top of the building, and then I have this really handy raisable people generator from the workshop that I can actually raise up and set to the height of the pedestrian path and hopefully get citizens come up to the roof height. So the first thing I'll do is use procedural objects on a door prop and basically stretch it out and make it look like that's the access point out onto the rooftop. Then I want to use a smaller version of that door, and this is where the pedestrian path will come through. So now the really fun stuff, I want to put a decal on the ground here to make it look a little bit more formal. We're going to add some tables in, obviously. We're also going to see some really practical things like handrails and balustrades around the edge. There's also going to be some nice planters and things like that up here. And I decided to use a glass fence prop for one side of the balustrade, just so that the view could be maintained on a small section of it. And while I was doing this, I sort of decided I might be able to use that same glass prop as an awning. So I used procedural objects to flip it up to the appropriate angle and then raise it up the building. And yeah, this looks pretty cool, so I'm going to run with it. So what makes this bridge so controversial? Well, aside from it being not very pleasing to look at, it's really its location. It doesn't really make any sense. It's so close to a nearby bridge, and considering that there's only 3 or 4 bridges going over the Grand Canal in total, having two so close together really seems a little mindless. I believe it was built in 2008, so it doesn't have much significance historically, but I was torn whether to put this version in the game or not, and ultimately I decided on a combination of that original bridge and sort of my own creation. I've followed the original shape of that bridge, but I've tried to use a more natural building material. So ultimately I've just changed this into the vanilla raised gravel path that goes into this really cool wood that sort of looks like it's a little bit aged, and this is perfect, to be honest. This soft warm feeling of the timber goes really well with the rest of Venice, and I really think that simplicity is the winner at the end of the day here. Just for a reference, we are pretty much directly across the Grand Canal from the railroad train station, and this is where lies pretty much the first attraction as you come off the train into Venice. I'm going to try pronouncing it. I believe it's called the Simeone Piccalo. I hope that's right. It's a church, and it's got this beautiful big circle shape and this nice big dome and spire that, looks pretty magnificent. I have a handful of buildings from the real life Venice, but unfortunately this wasn't one of them. So I've had to find an appropriate building and use procedural objects to make my own pretty much. That includes resizing it and shaping it and changing the colour. Next is to try and build this entryway coming into the church, and it consists of some stairs, there's some large columns, and then sort of a large gable-end type roof on top of that. I also use procedural objects to squeeze down a couple of other buildings and try and add some finer details, and eventually we're going to add some functionality back into the building with an entertainment cube service. Even though there's different attractions all over the city, I do want these sort of well-known ones or these large churches to be the main attractions. It would be really neat if there was a mod out there that let us set the entertainment value for any park or whatever. I guess I could probably just add multiple cubes in, but in any case it would be really cool to see lots and lots of tourists around these types of areas. Alright, so far the building is looking a little bit forced. I mean, I'm happy with it, the shape's good, but it just looks a little too clean. It really needs to look hundreds of years old, so I'm going to use an old tile wall that I've got as a prop, turn that to procedural objects, and then just try and make it look like the walls of the church are really aged, and maybe showing that original building material beneath a layer of plaster or something like that. Or maybe originally there was a building directly against the church and it was demolished for whatever reason, leaving one of its walls behind. In any case, I don't mind sort of doing my own creation here because it doesn't change the shape of the church or anything sort of major. It just adds a little bit of character, I think. The section of buildings here that I installed earlier in the episode along the edge of the Grand Canal really needs some detail, and I am not going to hold back here at all. We are really going to go to town with the detailing here, and the name of the game is pretty much just restaurants and shop fronts, but I'm going to do my best to make all of them unique in one way or another. The first thing I want to do is turn sections of our pedestrian path into narrow sections so that I can move these around where I'm going to have the restaurants. This should have the pedestrians moving around the tables and not right through them while someone's trying to have some pasta. The next thing I want to do is put some piers down. This is one thing that I've been really neglecting. There's lots of these posts and piers and sort of poles just to tie your boat up everywhere. I'm not sure if pier's the right word, but I noticed that some of them were coloured, some of them were sort of striped. So I'm going to spend a bit of time here making some different varieties and clusters of them and then placing them up and down the edge of the canal. Speaking of canals, I've seen your guys' comments now in regards to changing the murkiness of the water. As you can see, I haven't got around to trying it yet, but I will, just not quite yet. So before we get into detailing this little restaurant we're doing here, I'm going to put down some gondolas that Sven Berlin made for the series probably about 18 months ago. They are absolutely fabulous. Unfortunately, they're just a prop, so I can't use them as a ferry or anything like that, but I'm gonna sort of make it look like this is where you can hire them from. I thought it would be really cool and add a bit of an atmosphere to this restaurant if you were sort of watching them come and go as you ate. So now in terms of that restaurant, I've kind of just pictured in my head it's under some awnings, there's some nice hanging lights, it's very simple, just the tables, the menus and the view. The details are going to come at either end of these sort of adjoined awnings. We're going to have some nice little iron fences and also some beautiful flowers in planter boxes. I also spend a little bit of time making those flowers look like they've creeped up the poles that are holding the awnings up. So this ends up being one really cool little restaurant and very cozy indeed, but I think my favourite part about it is the lighting, and this was the biggest part of the vision, was sitting out here having something to eat, watching all of the vaporitos go past and the soft glow of the lights glistening off the water. I mean, that's just magical. A lot of the tables I've put in so far are just props, they have no functionality, so I'm being sure to add some of these tables in that do function. So far I've failed to find a table that can be raised up onto a false surface, so hence I have to have these usable tables back from the canal edge a little bit on real terrain. These ones here from Sven are perfect, they're a very simple 4-seater table. And here I'm not choosing any pattern, I'm just chucking them down randomly, as you can see. All of these tables act as buildings, so I need to drag the spawn point back to the nearby hidden road, and then I'll finish off this little wee courtyard with some more detailed shop fronts and some awnings. I'm so pleased to get at least a small section of the other side of the Grand Canal completed. I really can't wait to be looking down the Grand Canal and just seeing buildings for as far as you can see. I imagine that statement has made my trusty old PC very nervous indeed, but let's hope that it hangs in there. I want to thank you guys for watching, especially if you watched the whole episode. Thank you very, very much. I also appreciate your thumbs up if you've enjoyed the content, and stay tuned because there's more coming. So please take care of yourselves guys, take care of each other, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Europe in Detail. See you later.